No. All right. So this is Tune In Wine with David Cole. Welcome to our podcast. We're actually available on Apple Podcasts, and this will be available on YouTube. But today we have a very, very special guest, and he's actually a relative of mine. But we'll explain that a little bit. Matt Spinozzi, how you doing, Matt?
Pretty good. How about yourself, David?
Not too bad. So I sent Matt a little.
Happy Burns Day or Burns Night.
Yes. So you can kind of explain that a little bit. So this is Robert Burns Day. This is January 25th. So every 25th, right? January, we celebrate the very famous Robert Burns, the poet. And so we decided to talk about single malt Scotch, obviously Scotland. And I want to lead in with Matt a little bit, who I consider to be one of the leading experts of single malt Scotch. He's going to be a little humble and say, "Oh shucks," and not quite. But he's got not only is Matt a good taster of Scotch, but he's actually also been involved with making, going to distilleries and working with distillers, and you can explain that a little bit. So, needless to say, this is a lead-in. Matt's coming from also a very famous Italian family. His last name is Spinozzi. So I always know that Spinozzi family is very famous in Montepulciano di Abruzzo, which you had a recent trip, right? So
Yes. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I was in
that's a really
Abruzzo, Marche.
yeah. So we'll get a chance to talk about that, but we're going to talk about single malt Scotch, and I want to lead you in with the Robert Burns. So, needless to say, explain a little bit about you know. You can explain your background, so everybody would like to know a little bit about Matt Spinozzi and what I say his expertise in single malt Scotch.
Well, let me actually pour myself a whiskey so while we're talking. But yeah, the 25th of January is Burns Day. And Burns Day is Scotland's favorite son, a poet. But my background, I used to live in Scotland. Um, I used to live in Edinburgh. And I long time ago studied whiskey and beer in Scotland. I ended up doing a Master's of Science in Brewing and Distilling at Heriot-Watt University, in just outside of Edinburgh. And yeah, whiskey. Right now, I mean, my current occupation, I'm a bioscientist, process engineer, and product developer for the beverage and herbal industries. But I originally cut my teeth, so to speak, on whiskey. My first true love in that sense was Scotch malt whiskey, and that was where how I originally got into the beverage industry. In the intervening sort of 10 years since 11 years since I started in the beverage industry, I've run a couple distilleries, designed and built several. I do a lot of recipe development now. I mostly work as a consultant, so companies hire me when they've got a problem or they need design work done or a new product developed or a process optimized. And I've shifted away from the whiskey industry now, for the most part. Not that I'm against working with whiskey, but I part of what I specialize in now is how to stabilize beverages without preservatives. I'm an expert in fermentation, so I get hired for a lot of fermentation problems and ways to create new flavors
And
and emulsification.
you were also involved heavily with this the single malt society here in the United States, right? That was kind of an
I don't know.
interesting path
I don't
for
know if
you.
heavily is the word I would use, but yeah, I was pretty involved with Drammers Club for a while, and I'm still affiliated with them. I don't I live in I live in Oaxaca. I live in southern Mexico. So I'm in the land of mezcal. Yes, now my daily dram just more often mezcal than it is than it is whiskey. But I do have a few nice bottles here with me. Most of my collection, I've got a couple thousand bottles in storage in the US of nice vintage whiskey from before the industry took a nosedive.
Yeah,
But
we'll get a
yeah,
chance to we'll get a
yeah,
chance to talk about that because we'll call it the the state of the industry in single malt Scotch and
uh-huh.
your viewpoints. I actually I have a Lagavulin here.
Lagavulin.
Yeah, 16-year-old, and you've always corrected me on this. It's called Isla. I
Isla.
know
Yeah,
a lot of people
Isla.
probably say Islay malts, but the proper
I have heard many variants of pronunciation, but the correct pronunciation is Isla.
Isla. And what's interesting about this is the fact that it's a what we call a distillery that's on the coast. So you really if you ever really want to try Isla malt as opposed to let's say like a Macallan's or a Glenlivet, they're completely different scotches, right? Because this has got more of that maritime kind of like thought.
I'll join you in drinking an Isla malt. I've got a bit of Colilla here, which is a sister distillery to Lagavulin. They actually use the same base ingredient, the same base malt, but they distill in very different ways, which is the biggest difference. I use these actually when I'm teaching as an example of you start with the same base ingredients, but you run the stills differently, and you get two very different whiskeys. Because they're both owned by Diageo,
What are
and
some
they're
of the
both
nuances that are
on Isla.
different from Isla malts to, let's say, Highland malts? Well, what is
So
like
I mean, so
a
let's say
distinct difference?
one of my gripes actually with the Scotch whiskey industry is that regionality has terroir and whiskey has ceased to exist. It used to be extremely important, but it has by and large ceased to exist at most distilleries. And so now people, oh, it's coastal. That yes, the water used to matter a lot, but as they've shifted to becoming less, they're factories at this point. Most of these distilleries, um, and so then you have regional styles. So the Isla malts tend to be you have a very heavily peated malt. It's a way of drying the grain, the malted barley, and peat is basically partially decomposed plant matter in bogs. This is this acidic anaerobic environment. Um, and the plant matter doesn't fully decompose. Over thousands of years, it turns into peat or turf. You cut that out, dry it, and burn it, and it gives off a very, very distinctive phenolic smoke. And that when it's used to dry the barley, dry the malted barley, that imparts a specific flavor. And Isla is historically known for these very heavily peated malts, although not every malt produced on Isla is heavily peated or indeed peated at
Like
all.
Ardbeg, right? Ardbeg is the other
Yeah,
big
well, I mean,
distillery.
Ardbeg is right down. Yeah, Ardbeg, Lafroig, and Lagavulin are all sort of right next to each other
Okay,
on that stretch of island. And so they're all quite heavily peated. But then you would have stuff like Bunnahabhain, for example, which yeah, there does exist peated Bunnahabhain, and I've had some very quite nice ones, but they're very rare. Their style they don't peat their whiskey. They don't use peated malt for their whiskey. Um, but yeah, so in terms of regional style, that's really what the Isla style is famous for, and it does tend to have some maritime notes and stuff like that. Historically, the one of the most important things for terroir of a Scotch whiskey was the water source. And this is still true for a couple distilleries, but by and large, this is no longer true in the Scotch whiskey industry, because they are using it plays a role in fermentation, but they're doing all these water treatments for their fermentation to optimize yield and stuff like that. And then the whiskey is no longer being generally aged on site at the distillery. All these distilleries, they have a rick house or two or three, but the vast majority of the whiskey is being aged in these really large, centralized warehouses, not on site of the distillery. So it's not getting that. And so whiskey basically gets diluted twice in its existence for most whiskeys.
including
Uh,
older. Now this says this is quite famous because it's a 16, right? I mean
mhm.
this particular if you want to say because this actually the 16 is quite famous, right? It's more people would know the 16
The
more.
six, this yeah. So every so a lot of this they have their flagship sort of their flagship whiskey, all if you will, whatever their main bottle is. So Lagavulin, yeah, their their dominant offering is the 16-year-old, and for a long time that was really the only Lagavulin that you would frequently see.
Right.
But yeah, what I was saying about the whiskey, the being diluted is whiskey comes off the still at quite a high ABV, depending on which distillery it is and how they're running. It's usually in the mid 70s when it comes off the still.
Right.
And then it usually is entered. The whiskey industry has standardized pretty much at putting it in the barrel at 63.5% ABV. So it gets diluted once before it goes into the barrel. And then obviously, most whiskeys are not bottled at cask strength. Some are, but then it gets that one is not
Yeah,
probably.
this says 43% by volume.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one's been that's been chilled. That's probably been filtered and diluted. And so it gets diluted again when at bottling. Now, the water plays a big role in that they're using. And historically, some of the character of Islay whiskeys in particular, the water on Islay has flavor. Like if you've ever drunk from tasted like what water is naturally available on Islay. It's got quite a lot of flavor from, especially the ones that have gone through the peat bogs. It's got brine, it's briny, it's phenolic and all that. So if you're using that water to dilute your whiskey, that has a big impact on flavor. But when you're doing all this and your processed water is coming from the whatever water filtration is being done at the bottling plant and the storage facilities for the gas, then you've lost a lot of the terroir for the whiskey. So
And
that's one.
that's an interesting thing that you're talking about because we always talk about obviously wine with terroir, and a lot of people probably don't know that, right? They don't
See, I'm
realize.
using filtered water to dilute my whiskey right now. But
No, that's it, and that's your that's traditional way of drinking whiskey, right? When you go to Scotland and you go, they always give you a little bit of water, and you can add.
typically, yeah. I mean, if you're at some of the more traditional whiskey bars in Scotland, they actually will have a little spigot on the bar, specifically for water, putting water in your whiskey. And a lot of times, yeah, they'll give you a little pitcher. I mean, I just use beaker. This is what I have available. But it works well. You got the little spout on it. But yeah, they've got like little water jugs that they will give you with your whiskey, with your dram, and you put it in there. And I can go into a lot about the chemistry of what's happening there, but we don't. I know we're on a short time span. So I'd rather talk about the word dram a little bit, which is sort of what we would often refer to a measure of whiskey, a dram of whiskey. But I'm not sure if Robert Burns actually said this, but it's been attributed to him. But the definition of a dram is a measure equally pleasing to both guest and hosts. So I've never actually been able to confirm. I don't know if he actually said that. I will quote Robert Burns for hours, but I'm not sure if he actually said that. But it sounds like something he would.
Now, just out of curiosity, silly question. Why is it every 25th of January? Is there a specific
Birthday.
reason? That's his birthday. Okay, so the reason why it is, and but people have a traditional dinner, right? Isn't there kind
Mm,
of a,
yes,
like a
and actually,
Scottish
yeah.
dinner?
So there's something called a Burns supper, and now the Burns supper is often done to celebrate his birthday, Burns Day. But you can actually throw a Burns supper at any day of the year. So basically a Burns supper. Yeah,
Right.
there's basically it has whiskey, poetry, and traditional Scottish fare like haggis, neeps, tatties. Haggis being the most important. Yeah, and typically you'd have whiskey, recitation of poetry, and haggis would be the centerpiece of the meal.
Well, that's really
And
cool. Do
you'd
you?
have yeah, and you'd have the convivial conversation that generally accompanies an ample flow of whiskey.
Do you have a specific poem Robert Burns poem that would probably
Oh, that
be
that's
more?
like ask that's like asking me to pick my favorite whiskey.
Oh,
It
wow.
depends. It
Okay.
depends a lot on my
On,
mood.
on your mood.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's one that comes to mind right now. It's called A Bottle and a Friend, and at least that's a short one. But and that's a good one. But he's got stuff like Address to the Haggis. So typically, he wrote something called the Address to the Haggis, or Address to a Haggis, sorry, which is typically recited as the haggis comes in to the is brought in, is piped in to the you have a piper bring that to the table for the burn supper. I won't say the whole thing, but it starts off. Fair fa your honest sonsy face, great chieftain all the pudding race. Aboon them all you talk your place, pinch tripe or therm. We lie ye worthy o' grace as lang's my Adam.
Very good. You know,
So yeah, he's basically praising the haggis as being that yeah, there's some great scenes like uh in the poem. I love that poem. He's got To a Mouse, which actually might end up being the line from that's going to be familiar to most of your listeners, I think. If you've ever heard of the book of Mice and Men
Yeah, oh,
by
yeah, of course.
Steinbeck.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
Steinbeck. Yeah, everybody read that in high school.
yeah,
I think.
yeah.
I
I
think.
cried when I read that and Lenny got shot. But anyway, the sorry for spoilers, anybody. But the title is actually a reference to a Robert Burns poem, To a Mouse. So it's a reference to the line in To a Mouse: "The best laid plans o' mice and men gang after glee, and leave us no but grief and pain for promised joy." And so it's a farmer apologizing to a mouse whose hovel he's accidentally just destroyed with his plow. And he turns it on, but then he turns it on to a bit of a rumination on life, and how you can plan for the future, but it doesn't go so well. And so that, yeah, Robert Burns, actually famously on the subject of whiskey, he was actually an excise man, the guy who's responsible for taxing whiskey
Oh,
in Scotland, and before he became, a very successful
boo,
poet. That
boo.
was
We don't like taxes on more taxes on
No,
whiskey.
no, we don't. But
That's
neither
another
did Robert
subject we can
Burns.
talk
And
about.
Robert
Yeah.
Burns actually wrote a poem making fun, or a song making fun of his own profession, called "The Deal's a Wall with the Excise Man," and it's
Oh,
about how happy everybody is when the devil comes and takes the excise man down to hell where he belongs,
oh,
because that's the only fitting place for an excise man. But there's also a collection of Robert Burns poems that were too bawdy, and they were not published during his lifetime.
hmm,
They were circulated amongst his friends and all that, and they weren't kept hidden, but they were not officially published. And then posthumously, there was a volume called the Merry Muses of Caledonia, and that was published.
hmm.
And That's got poems in it like "The Fornicator" and "9 Inch Will Please a Lady," which is exactly what you think what it sounds like it's about. And also it has "Coming Through the Rye." Now, "Coming Through the Rye," if anybody's ever read "Catcher in the Rye,"
Right.
the title of that is a reference to this song, which Holden Caulfield keeps misquoting, and he doesn't understand what it's actually about because it's in Scots. But it's actually about having a very promiscuous woman who likes having sex in the rye field, and there's a line there's a line in it that says Jenny's always wet, Jenny's seldom dry. She lifted up her petticoaty coming through the rye. So so he's got that. Robert Burns was famously a womanizer. And
Yeah, that's what I that he had quite a number of children apparently. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna actually lead into that because my
yeah.
grandmother, whose maiden name was Burns, Hillary Burns, used to always tell me that we're related to Robert Burns. But when I said that, I didn't really think about it much, whether it was right or whether it was wrong. But
Mhm.
from what I heard, he did have quite a number of children. So
Yeah,
there is a possibility that he's branched out into all different places and people and women and so.
yeah.
But anyway, we want to give a toast to him. So
To him.
at least and a toast to you.
So
So
there is a toast that Burns wrote. I mean, he wrote several, but a toast that Burns wrote is, uh, "Here's a bottle and an honest friend. What would you wish for more, man? What canes before his time may end, where his share of cares may be, man. So catch the moments as they fly, use them as you ought, man. Believe me, happiness is shy and comes not high when sought, man."
cheers. That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. So, yeah, my I was going to also talk to you because you had mentioned the other day when we were talking um, your displeasure with the Scotch industry for a number of things, but you did say something
That's
to
a
me.
very polite way of putting it.
Yeah, and politely. But let's just say you said, well, prices had gone up, but the quality hadn't gone up with the price, meaning,
No,
even though
the quality has nosedived.
right. It has nosedived, but the prices have increased. And what you've tasted maybe 10, 15 years ago is completely different than what you may be tasting in a bottle of scotch that you're buying
Oh yeah,
today.
like yeah, none of the bottles I've got. I mean, a bunch of my old bottles got messed up in a flood. The whiskey's fine, but the labels got screwed up. But yeah, I don't. yeah, there's very few
Save the
bottles.
whiskey, save the whiskey. Is that what they?
Yeah. Yeah, I salvaged the bottles, but the labels all got messed up. But that's fine. I know what I know for the most part what they are. And when I don't, it's kind of fun. It's like, oh, what the hell is this? It's like, but yeah, I mean, there are no. I want to first say there are exceptions to this. Not every whiskey produced right now is shit, but most of it is in Scotland that's being sold.
It's all
The
bottom
problem
line today, right? Bottom line, and that's a little bit
yeah,
what you
yeah,
said.
it's all the modern Scotch whiskey industry is dominated by accountants and petrochemical engineers. I can't count the amount of times I've been to a distillery in Scotland, and most of the staff tell me they don't even like whiskey.
Hmm.
There's no soul. These aren't really distilleries anymore. These are factories that happen to produce whiskey for
Wow,
the most part.
that's interesting in itself. Yeah.
For the most part, and it's all about just maximizing yield, making what the marketing department wants in a way that satisfies the accountants. Now
So
there are exceptions. There are a few independent distilleries and small companies that there is still some soul. There is the kernel of soul left. There are some bastions of real whiskey. There's new distilleries like Dornoch. Who make real whiskey, who want to revive traditional methods and stuff like that. There's guys like Springbank who've always been a little crazy, and that, and Kilhoman on Isla. We were talking about Isla. They did good stuff. I've always had a lot of respect for Glenfarclas from on the space side. If you want like more of the sherry bomb space side style, which Macallan made famous and also bastardized more recently. I'd recommend going over to something like Glenfarclas. So there is real whiskey still being made, good whiskey still being made, and it's not, and even the big distilleries, they are still laying down good stuff, but the what the accountants and the marketing creatures and the petrochemical engineers want is unfortunately, there's not really much of a drive for quality, and and that's also that's in large part also the fault of the consumer. The average whiskey consumer doesn't really know what good whiskey tastes like. They just want something smooth. And I can tell you right now, if you ever talk to somebody who actually knows whiskey and you say you want something smooth, you ever go to a bar, you're not, you've automatically lost credibility. The worst thing you can say, and this goes for pretty much any spirit. If you say, "Oh, it's smooth," or "I want something smooth," no. Good whiskey, good mezcal, good rum is not smooth. It is full of flavor. It is not there to be over the teeth, past the gums, watch out, Betty, here it comes. Like that's not how you drink the stuff. You take little sips. You want the thing bursting with flavor. If it's easy to drink, that means that if it just goes down then it's got
it's been
no flavor. You
it's
should be
been
able to
diluted.
you
Yeah.
when you open that bottle, when the bartender is pouring your whiskey 5 feet away from you, you should be able to smell it already. Like
Yeah, that's true.
that is a sign of good whiskey.
That's true. What do
And
you
that's
think
true for
about?
mezcal. That's true for rum. That's true for I mean, that's true for sherry. Like you should smell that damn thing across the bar. That is the mark of a nice spirit. It's not like, oh, it goes down so easy. Fuck that. You want something that if you just give it a little kiss, a little besito, that flavor lingers. And that's why you also have your water and you have a beer with it, whatever. Like it it's there. So for me, like good whiskey should be full of flavor. It should be complex. One of the other things I really look for when I taste the whiskeys, how does the flavor change? If I just get this monochromatic, oh, it smells like strawberries. It tastes like strawberries. I'm just pulling a flavor note. That's not what I'm tasting right now. But you want development. So I've got right here, like this is a whiskey I truly love. So this is Pityvec. Don't get your hopes up. You're not going to be finding bottles of this anywhere.
Piggy bank, or
This
what's it called? Piggy bank?
Pityvec. This is an old
Oh, pity bank. Yeah.
space.
Okay.
Yeah, this is an
Cool.
old space side
Wow.
distillery.
20 years. Yeah.
But that distillery was demolished in the 90s. The last drops that came off their stills were in 93.
Hmm.
So this is a 20-year-old. This was 20 years old when it was bottled, and this bottle is I don't remember when this bottle is from, but this bottle is at least I believe 10 years old.
How do you
And this is a cast strength.
Is that
But yeah,
done in
that was
sherry cask? Is that done sherry cask?
no. This was, I believe, not a sherry cask. This was done in ex bourbon barrels. I can tell you this is not a single cask, so there might be there might be a bit of sherry casks in there. One of 6,000. So yeah,
Yeah, for people that really don't know, Matt, explain now because traditionally it was always sherry cask, right? That was kind of
not at all.
no, no, no. But the reason why I'm saying that is because I do know now that they're starting to use like Sauterne casks. They're using port cask, right? And that is that's kind of a new
And
kind of a thing,
let me go back. So on the traditional, let's talk about the tradition of aging whiskey first, and then we'll go to what's being done now.
right?
So the aging, it's funny because my dissertation was a very long time was actually on the origins of Scotch malt whiskey. And sort of what the proto malt whiskey was. But the origins of aging were more in just we need a vessel to hold it and transport it. And the Scots are famously tight bastards. They do not like to spend money. And so they were basically putting the whiskey in whatever vessel was cheapest.
Hmm.
And the that was not always sherry cask, but you know, go back a while, and yes, sherry cask like a couple hundred years ago did dominate for a little while, and that's because the English in particular were drinking tons of sherry. British in general, but especially the English, were drinking a lot of sherry. So the sherry would get sent over from Jerez in southern Spain, to Britain in barrels. And
Right,
now it didn't make sense to ship these empty barrels back to Spain.
right,
So the Scotch whiskey distillers would then buy the emptied sherry barrels because they were cheaper than making new barrels, and they would use those to hold their whiskey. And that's the origin of essentially aging whiskey in sherry barrels. Now, when
oh,
you had now if we talk about something that's probably much quite familiar to you is the phylloxera crisis that hit
yeah,
Europe, right?
right,
When that happened, sherry production plummeted. And talking of sauternes, there actually is a history of aging in those because the English liked claret.
right.
The English called Sauterne claret. Um, and so they would use those barrels as well. Scots would use any barrel that was cheap originally in the whiskey. It was not but at the same time as you have the phylloxera crisis, you also have a law coming into place in America for tax reasons that bourbon must be aged in new oak casks. And the reason for that has nothing to do with quality, but it was because it was the easiest way for them to keep track of taxation. Pretty much every law in the alcohol industry is there for the purpose of taxation. And so it was hard to monitor how much whiskey these guys were producing in America, but it was much easier to monitor how many barrels they were using and buying. Yeah,
Hmm.
that. And so they do so by making it that they had to be aged, that they couldn't reuse casks for bourbon, it was much easier to keep track of the taxation. As a result, there's all this American oak that barrels that were now flooding the market used. And so the Scots started buying those, and that roughly in a time sense coincided with the with the problems due to phylloxera, which is basically a grapevine blight. I mean, I'm sure you have plenty of videos where you've talked about that.
Well, yeah, that's interesting that you say that because that was to today even you're having disease, and mold and all sorts of like problematic positions now in France. But yeah, phylloxera was the insect that would actually eat at the roots, and they had no way of stopping this, and it just
Mm.
wiped out a lot of the vines. So then you're
Mhm.
right. I mean, how do you make wine? So and you don't need the barrels.
And
So, but
now pretty much all wine is made on North American rootstock that they then graft on European grape to.
correct, correct. But no, but at the same time, I'm starting to see, like I said, like they'll have like different like they'll have a sherry cask, they'll have a like a cognac. It might even
Uh-huh.
use very, very expensive
So now they've gone from maturation to
Yeah,
finishing.
correct.
And Yeah, and there's something famous. So I used to give lectures on the chemistry of what happens when you age whiskey.
Right.
I gave lectures on that at at the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Italy in Bologna. I given that for the American Distilling Institute, Bar Institute. I gave quite a few lectures on literally the maturation chemistry of spirits in general, but whiskey was one of the main components of it. And one of the things one of the things I like the core points of my lectures is um extraction does not equal maturation. They're very different. So you can extract things from the wood, and that is very different from maturing the spirit.
Hmm.
Now, maturation involves extraction. But one of these Scotch whiskey is almost never aged in new barrels. About 90, I think 97% right now is the number, percent of all Scotch whiskey is aged in ex-bourbon casks. Um, and everything else is that other 3%.
Hmm.
But it's
Wow,
not,
that's
but
quite a lot. That's
it's
quite a lot.
still, it's still not new.
Huh.
And honestly, there's a lot of I don't like marketing people, and the marketing people have a lot of influence over what gets called what in Scotch whiskey. So a lot of what they say is sherry casks are not, I would not something I would ever consider sherry, and they're not nothing you would want to drink. So for example, almost every single thing that is labeled as a sherry cask, and there's very rare exceptions, but that is not really a sherry cask.
Hmm.
It is
Interesting.
it's basically Paxaret, which is this syrupy shit that you don't want to drink. Is basically they take they take a cask, whatever, and they power wash it, for lack of a better word, or pressure wash, not power wash it, pressure wash it with this syrupy garbage that's Paxaret. It's not a drinking sherry. This is the stuff that you would get at the supermarket that they put salt in it for cooking, essentially. And that's how they make it a sherry cask. This is and that's the overwhelming majority of sherry casks in the Scotch whiskey industry
Hmm.
because the good bodegas, the good sherry houses, they don't really sell their casks. They reuse them. The sherry, the reason Scotch whiskey industry started using sherry casks was because they were shipping sherry in casks. Sherry is no longer shipped in casks, so it's very rare to have a cask from a good sherry house. It does happen, be sold. And it definitely in orders of magnitude lower than can meet the demand of the Scotch whiskey industry for sherry casks. So the Scotch whiskey industry, like people like Macallan, oh, we have our own bodega, whatever. No. Macallan basically manufactures fake sherry casks. This is not stuff that to me, it's not a sherry cask unless it held a sherry
Oh,
that
of
would
course.
actually
Yeah.
be used for drinking.
From Jerez,
Like,
Jerez, Jerez.
but
From
it's in Jerez. But to me, it's not really a sherry cask if it held a liquid that wasn't really designed to be consumed as sherry. Like
right.
if it's, I mean, I love sherry. But if it did, if it didn't hold a sherry that you would bottle
Mm,
and sell as a sherry to be drunk as a nice beverage,
mm.
then fuck you.
What about Sauterne? No,
Don't piss on me and tell me it's raining.
no, no. What about Sauterne and port casks? Are those starting to
So
be?
now they're doing these finishes where this is
Right.
different than maturation. So what a
Right.
finish is basically they've aged it in they've generally aged it in a ex bourbon cask.
Right.
And so it spent the majority of Scotch whiskey must be a minimum of 3 years old before it can be called Scotch whiskey. But so they've generally aged it in an ex bourbon cask. And then for the last 6 to 12 months of its aging or its maturing, they've put it in another cask,
Hmm.
like a Sauterne or sherry or red wine, whatever. The marketing departments are getting very creative. And that's the difference between finishing and matured. So there's a difference to me between matured in Yeah, yeah. Matured to me means it spent at least several years in that cask. Like if it hasn't spent at least 3 years in a cask, it has not been matured.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
and really for maturation, you need a lot more, especially for Scotch whiskey in the climate of Scotland. You need a lot more than 3 years for maturation. But yeah, so that's the difference between a finish. So a finish, like a lot of times, yeah, and also with a lot of these cask finishes, because they want as much influence of that cask as possible. The casks aren't true. The casks aren't truly empty. So you are not allowed to add sugar officially to whiskey. But you look at guys like Macallan and a lot of these other things, and what they do is they take this syrup that they masker that's masquerading as sherry, and they pressure they basically pressure wash the cask with it to get it into the wood, and then they dump it, and they make sure that they're not dumping out 100% of what's in there. So it's a really wet cask, and because it's got this this sugary liquid masquerading as sherry in there, a lot of that sugar comes over into the distillate and onto the distillate into the final product. So there's actually quite a lot of sugar.
So that gives it
But
that sweet, yeah,
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like
yeah, 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 yeah. That's why it's got the yeah, yeah. And there's all sorts of crap in there that I don't think belongs in a good whiskey. But
so.
that's just
So,
that's
but you're
personal
saying not preference. you're saying not everybody does this, like Springbank. You had mentioned them. They have different labels at the red label, right? And you're
Oh
talking
yeah, I
like
mean,
a
and
green label.
Springbank actually has multiple marks of brands of whiskey. Right? So at the Springbank Distillery, they actually make three different brands.
Right.
They have Springbank, and then they have Long Grow, and then they have why am I getting a brain fart on this? The one that Hazelburn, which is triple distilled. So Springbank, they call it 2.5 times distilled. I don't think I can go very much into what that means, but
Mm.
that's for another time.
Yeah.
They've got
We'll have to do another. We'll have to
they've
do
got Hazelburn, which
another
is
episode. Yeah.
yeah, they've got Hazelburn, which is triple distilled. And then they've got Long Grow, which is heavily peated, and not yeah, and memory serves correct, that one's only just normally double distilled. But they and then they've also down the street got the Glengyle distillery, and there's a funny story to actually why they started that. Again, not enough time to go into that.
Yeah.
But they're a bit cracked in a good way. They still and the accountants have had some influence over them, but they've kept the accountants at bay. And then you've got Glenn Farclas, which is owned by the Grant family, and those guys are all characters, and they make real whiskey free. If you want that more of that traditional space, Springbank is Campbelltown, Glenn Farclas is Speyside. Yeah, they are, they are holdouts and sort of like, no, we're gonna do stuff our own way. And if you want for the best bargain for a sherry bomb Speyside whiskey, I would say Glen Farclas. Yeah, put the Macallan down the drain and go for Glen Farclas. And then if you want more like the young bucks that are trying to really revive old traditions, I would say Dornoch. Yeah, the Thompson
Well, keep
brothers,
an
those
eye
guys.
out for that, right? Doorknock. That sounds like a hot brand coming up. Doorknock.
I mean, they've been in the works for a while. I mean, they're not big production. Yeah,
I don't
yeah. I
see that.
mean,
I don't see that brand
no,
anymore.
no, no, no. Yeah, yeah, no. They're not well, but like yeah, those guys I got respect for. I mean, there's a lot of guys I got respect for the things, brands, the big brands. I tend not to, I'm gonna get in trouble for this, but I don't. Yeah, if you're owned by a big multinational, I got less desire to drink your stuff at this point because the accountant it's accountants and petrochemical engineers at this point.
Well, but listen, the wine
I like
business, the wine
Kill
business is
Holman
just
on
like
yeah.
that.
What?
The wine business is just like that too. I mean, one of the leading
Yeah.
wines out there, and I don't necessarily need to educate people on like Josh Cabernet, but I mean they're producing millions and millions of bottles of this stuff. So everything has a
And it's
shortcut.
funny because
You
both of
know,
the whiskeys I've drunk on here were their own but like they're older bottlings.
yeah.
They look
We'll
more
have
than
to
that.
talk
And
about older bottlings, just to
mhm.
get into because basically there's younger people out there like yourself that want to learn about single malt Scotch. They go to a store and they see, they'll ask the advice of a lot of people who probably don't know single malt Scotch, and then
Hmm.
they'll guide them to, like you say, the Macallans or the Glenlivets of the world. And so we really the younger generation wants to learn. I just don't think that they have the opportunity to do that. So I have a book
Yeah.
here, and I just wanted you to talk
My
about
cork,
this.
the cork just broke on this
Oh, the
bottle I'm
cork.
trying to
Oh,
open. Yeah, so
that's sad.
the Scotch whiskey famously, especially, has used
Yeah.
the cheapest, shittiest corks on offer because they never intended these bottles to actually be used for a while. That's why I usually have to wrap my bottles in like paraffin tape and all that. So I wanted to have this nice old Auchentoshan bottle, not even that
Oh,
old, but
that's right.
Allen.
That's your favorite one. I wanted to
No, no,
ask.
no, no.
I want to ask your opinion here. So I got this book for got to be 25, 30 years ago, and it's
It's one of the
Michael
old Michael Jackson.
Jackson's
That's one of the old Michael
Michael.
Jackson books.
Yeah, Michael Jackson's Complete Guide to Single Malt Scotch. So if you ever want to learn about Scotch, you recommend this book, Michael Jackson's book.
I
I mean,
have
if you want to learn,
I haven't read that particular book, but I have tremendous respect for Michael Jackson.
yeah,
So
and
I will say this. I would generally
here it is, everybody.
view something from Michael Jackson. Yes. So now, but the problem is what he's writing about in there is no longer what is going on in the
Oh
industry.
no, no, of
So,
course, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah,
So if
yeah.
you want a historical view, I have nothing but respect for Michael Jackson. He's one of the great. He's also for beer. Michael Jackson,
Yeah,
one of
I have one of
the
his beer
the
books
great
too. Yeah,
guys for beer.
yeah.
So yes, I am in no way casting shade on Michael Jackson. I have nothing but respect for him and what he wrote, which is actually quite rare for me to say. But it's 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 old, and the whisk and the industries have changed so much since he wrote. So
Sure.
if what he says about a particular distillery or in there, even if it's still Lagavulin 16 or whatever, the whiskey is completely different
Yeah,
from the whiskey that he was writing about.
yeah. Like
So
Like Lafroig. If he mentions
anything.
Lafroig 25, 30 years ago, it's a completely
Yes,
different Lafroig. Yeah,
it is
no,
totally
that's
different. It
yeah.
is totally different whiskey. Michael
So
Jackson, I can't he passed away a while ago. I can't remember when, but
yeah.
so anything written by Michael Jackson is quite old. And it's no you so yeah,
So how do
just
you
keep that in
recommend to
mind.
people? How do you recommend to people to let's say you're in your 20s and you want to learn about single malt Scotch quickly because we're just about done here. What do you recommend for people to educate themselves a little bit so they can at least get maybe not your knowledge? I mean, you've got a world of knowledge, but something that can at least guide you a little bit as to the wonderful world of single malt Scotch. Would you recommend any writers today? Is there a book out there that you would do say this guy has a good handle on it, so people can buy a book? Just
Uh
they go to
Honestly,
Barnes
like
and Noble, they can go to
no,
like
no, don't. Yeah, I mean,
Amazon.
I honestly can't think of any book that I would recommend. I would
Okay,
recommend trying to find a local whiskey club. You find people who really know what they're drinking and drink with them.
okay.
Generally, the best way to learn about whiskey is to find people who are passionate about whiskey and hang with them and drink
All
with
right,
them.
so you want to give a little shout out to the Drammers Club because that's a nationwide affiliation, right? They have
Well, it's not
a
easy. They're like, yes, yes. So Drammers is good for that. My buddy runs it. A good friend of mine, Charlie Prince. Drammers is great. Like they've got chapters in tons of cities around the world.
correct, yeah, yeah.
If
Especially in New
you're
York,
more
they have New
local,
York, right? New York,
well, I mean, they were founded in New York, but yeah, I mean, they got stuff all over the world. So depending where you are, look up Drammers Club. Then there's also local associations. I mean, I was just hanging actually in Oaxaca of all places, with Claudio from the Italian Whiskey Club. And they're very good and stuff like that. Go
okay,
to
so
your
that's
local go find a bar, but the best way to go talk to people, say, hey, I like this. The best thing you can do, if you want to learn about whiskey and you don't really know, get an idea of flavor notes, start reading and stuff like that, but ask questions. And now if you're looking at bottles of whiskey and stuff like that, if it's got a lot of fancy marketing speak on it, stay away from the bottle.
hmm.
The more bullshit marketing, oh, finished in this, stay away from, oh, it's been finished in this, and oh, yes, we named it after this god, this Norse god, or whatever. You stay away from that. for now. Not that everything like that is bad, but just go for we make good. Yeah, like this is good whiskey, and this is how we made it. Yeah, that is look for people who you look for shit that stuff that's we're proud of what we made. Yeah, we don't need a bunch of marketing jackasses to help us sell it because we make good whiskey. That's it. Go to a bar and say, hey, like go to like the whiskey bar and not some fancy thing with a bunch of hipsters that are just trying to upsell you on stuff. Uh it doesn't matter how many bottles, how many different whiskeys a bar has. It
Yeah.
matters if they've got good whiskey. I've gone to bars. Oh, we've got 100 whiskeys, and there's not a single whiskey on there that I want to drink. Because it's like, oh, good. You just bought the entire portfolio from Diageo and Pernod Ricard. Good job. So you got to actually find that. Look on blogs and blog. Reddit's a great place. There's
Right.
you will actually find people who are very passionate about this stuff on Reddit. But yeah, go to whiskey events.
Cool.
Uh,
One last thing before we go. One more Robert Burns um, quote or poem that
well,
you,
so let's talk. Let's
sign off.
maybe we can get to your origins.
Yeah.
So he did write the poem I referenced, "The Fornicator," and this was because he got hauled up before the Kirk, the Presbyterian Church in Scotland, and denounced for being a fornicator. And
Oh,
he
that's
actually
right.
got,
Yeah.
and he actually, and they issued him a fine, which in his poem, and so he wrote this rebuttal. Um, which he circulated amongst his friends and all that in this, and he refers to the fine as the buttock hire, like literally the ass fee, the ass rental fee, and so it starts off. Ye jovial boys who love the joys, the blissful joys of lovers, yet dare avow we dauntless brow when the bonny lass discovers. I pray draw near and lend an ear and welcome in a freighter. I've lately been on quarantine, a proven fornicator.
That's
Yeah,
great. Hey, cheers.
there's another four verses. But actually, I did just come up with one more Robert Burns quote. This I think is
Okay.
very applicable to whiskey.
Okay.
And it's from his poem, which is actually as close as I get to religion, is this poem called "A Man's a Man for All That." It's a very egalitarian poem. It's actually quite controversial at the time he wrote it because of how egalitarian it is. Um, but there's a line in it that says, "The rank is but the guinea's stamp, the man's the gowd for all that." So a guinea was a big gold coin, and it had a stamp on it to signify, what it was, and all that. Gowd means gold for in Scots, and so it says the guinea is valuable not because of what's stamped on it, but because it's made of gold, because of what it's made of. And similarly, a man or a person is worthwhile, of value, not because they have money or they have some high social status, but because of what's actually inside. Like who that person is, what they do, how they comport themselves.
Hmm.
This is basically the whole poem is about this. And similarly, like with whether it's an age statement on a whiskey or some fancy marketing bullshit or all that, that's the Guinness stamp. That's the stamp on there. That's not why you should be drinking that whiskey. This is good whiskey, not because it's a 20-year-old or because it's from a defunct distillery or all that. It's because there's good liquid in this bottle. Yeah, so everything that's on this, the fact that it's 20 years old, or the fact that the distillery hasn't produced a drop of whiskey since 1993, or any of that, that's the Guinness stamp.
Hmm.
But the gold is because there's damn good liquid in this bottle.
And it is gold. Anyway, Matt, it's great to see you. And
Likewise, David.
cheers to you and happy Robert
Cheers.
Burns Day, huh? And we'll have to get a
Or in Gaelic, slanja, and then the response would be slanja. So slanja is to health, and then the response is to good health. So slanja, and you would say slanja.
cheers. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode, buddy. You take care.
Likewise. Have a
All
good
right.
one.
Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.